Hi, this podcast is recorded on Gadigal land. Lee and I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this place and also the custodians of the place where you're listening, wherever you are.
There is some good, I should say first of all, hello Annabelle Crabb. There is some
Hello.
good content on ABC iView at the moment.
Far out, there sure is. Yep.
Okay, have you watched After the Party?
I am halfway through it. Yeah.
Okay, I loved it.
Okay, I am loving it.
Right. So this is a show which is set in New Zealand,
New Zealand?
Wellington, New Zealand, with a woman named Robin Malcolm playing the lead, who I think was in Upper Middle Bogan.
Right, she's super familiar to me.
Yeah.
And she is fantastic.
It's got kind of Happy Valley vibes, which is another show that I really loved. So she basically, and this isn't a spoiler because it's established in episode 1, she's separated from her husband, and it's clear she's made some kind of accusation against her husband, which is very unsavoury, and people are kind of split about the merits of what she's done, basically.
She's a teacher too.
She's a teacher, yes. Some people kind of are in her camp, but then there's other people who clearly she's kind of dead to, and then her ex-husband arrives back in town, and then it kind of goes from there. I could not stop watching it. I was really glued to it, and I just thought Robin Malcolm was absolutely superb.
She's a great character. And early in the piece, in the film, in the series, when it's not quite clear what's going on, she and her ex-husband have an adult daughter who's got a young child, and she lives and works as a teacher. She's got a community of friends. She pedals her bike around and picks up her grandson from childcare and whatever. And then the ex-husband moves back to town and moves in with the daughter. So it's like, okay. And then you start to find out the backstory. But one of the early scenes in the series is her addressing a classroom full of boys.
Oh, that's fantastic. I want to sit my kids down to watch that.
Yeah. And what's happened is, standard, is it a boys' school? Or is it just, I think it's a boys' school that she teaches at.
Yeah.
And they've confiscated somebody's phone and there's porn on it. And it's like this girl kind of being, it's like, and she grabs the phone and she clicks it into the overhead projector, and then she just flashes up a still from this porno that they obviously have all been swapping around between themselves. And so all these boys are just like, and she just then gives them the most straightforward discussion about, look, you've all seen this. Of course you want to see it. Of course you're curious because, what's going on in your bodies right now and your hormonal state is that your body is just starting to think about reproducing and doing what it's sort of designed to do, and that is perfectly natural, of course. But the thing is, when you watch this sort of stuff, it doesn't resemble the actual real life thing that happens. If you are ever fortunate enough to get to the point where, you are intimate with another human being, it's not going to be like this. Anyway, it was a great talk, and she would have got the sack immediately if she was teaching in an Australian school. And who knows, maybe New Zealand too. But it reminded me of Helen Garner, who early in her teaching career got the sack for having a perfectly straightforward conversation about sex with a bunch of kids, and then just got
It was great. And she kind of ends it by saying, right, and then you can say, thank you, Mrs. So-and-so, for saving my sex life. Right, let's get on with the lesson. And then she moves on. It's a great bit of, like I said, I just want to sit my two boys down and go, can you just watch this 3 minutes of TV?
I remember I had a teacher at my country South Australian primary school who, I don't know, a bunch of us were sitting around and one of the girls, I think, said somebody's creaming their jeans over something or other. And possibly me, I don't know, I had no idea what that meant. But she overheard this conversation and she came and sat down with us and explained. She said, right? But it was really interesting because I didn't know, nobody, what that meant. And she's like, well, when women become sexually excited, there's some vaginal secretions. And so I'm like, oh, God, dear. Wow. But I've often thought of that because I thought, oh yeah, like that's a pretty straightforward thing to do when you overhear, half-formed thoughts kind of getting like passed around. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a bold thing to do, right? Because I assume teenagers of today would have the reaction you had, which is like, oh God, an adult's like, oh yeah, it's totally different. Yeah, that's right. You just have a look on YouTube and so forth.
Yeah. Or just go to your OnlyFans. It's all made pretty clear there. Content warning.
Another thing on iView that I would recommend, it's a bit self-interested, but Australian Story is doing a 3-parter on 3 restaurateurs. The first episode was about Josh Nyland.
I haven't seen that yet, and he's so interesting, that guy.
He is really interesting, and it's Olivia Rousseau is the producer on it. He's one of our very talented. Great. I mean, honestly, I can't tell you how much I love working on Australian Story. They are such a talented, nice group of people. Anyway, Olivia's kind of directed this 3-parter, and so Josh Nyland was person number 1. And so it goes into, for anyone who doesn't know him, he's kind of this
he's a fish magician.
And he's kind of one of, I mean, Jamie Oliver and Nigella Lawson are in the story saying this guy is globally significant. He's basically decided to treat fish like you treat beef, really, and
the beef of the sea.
Beef of the sea, which is, and so just trying to use all parts of the fish and so forth, and to make it more, because fish is very expensive to cook with. There's a lot of waste, so to try to make it more economical. Anyway, he's come up with all these innovative ways to cook and use fish and so forth. But his backstory is very interesting because when he was a child, he had cancer. And he was filmed for a documentary as a child for a cancer doco. And so we had the footage from that. It's a hard watch, that bit of it. Anyone that's ever had to care for a child going through unpleasant medical procedures, it's very triggering because he gets told that he has to have this thing done and he starts crying in a really sad kind of way. And and it's kind of like you said in the last episode about when you're watching Talented Mr. Ripley and it's young people who are now older people and you're like, you know what happens. It's that in reverse where you've just been seeing adult Josh Nyland. So you know that he's survived his childhood cancer. So it's quite hopeful in many ways. And you know he's gone on to do amazing things. But then you're looking at this child going, God, that's him. Like it's really difficult to see him kind of in that position. And his mum, who's interviewed in the story as well, is there in the hospital with him. And so, yeah, it's really very affecting. And then he's kind of still deeply impacted by it because he's got this kind of sense of urgency and he's doing so much, and he got married pretty young and he's got 4 kids and he's just cramming it all in. And so, anyway, it's a very, very compelling thing, and it's really beautifully shot by Tom Hancock, our camera operator. It's really, several people texted me on when it went to air to say, look, I'm trying to do something else, but I just caught the first 3 minutes of Australian Story. Now I can't get away from it. It's hooked me. Yeah.
I met him, I think last year, because I did, they did this fundraiser for the Starlight Foundation called 4 Chefs or 5 Chefs. Anyway, I was emceeing it and I met him. He was one of the chefs that was contributing a dish, and I was like, should I curtsy, Josh Nyland, and did not know that he was many, many years ago a beneficiary of the Starlight Foundation. And catch this, they sent him, because he was a massive Chicago Bulls fan, they sent him to see the Chicago Bulls played. And he's got a photo of himself with Luke Longley.
I know, that's just extraordinary, isn't it?
Right?
Like, I know, the kind of, because Australian Story's done Luke Longley as well, so I love that bit of trivia, but also just for us, because we've got that connection too. Like, it's kind of
do you
just
know Luke
amazing.
Longley?
I do.
Oh, amazing.
And Paul McCartney,
that's
in case
cool,
you didn't know. Anyway, it's definitely worth a look. It's amazing.
Yeah, great. All right, we'll do. I watched a show called White Fever, which has been up for a little while.
Yes, and I'm curious to know about this.
I really loved it. And I actually looked, to be completely honest, when I saw the kind of sizzle reel, the kind of promo. So the premise is that this young woman who was adopted as I think it's like a 3 or 4 year old from Korea, and it's adopted by Australian parents. The mum is played by Ros Hammond, very, very brilliantly.
She's so great, Ros Hammond.
Yeah, she is. And so the principal character, whose name is Jane, is played by Ra Chapman, who also wrote the whole thing, right? And she is terrific. And the thing that I liked most about it is the writing is good. Like it's well written. And sometimes if I'm watching, even when the actors are fantastic, if I'm watching a drama or a comedy it's not written well, I can't watch it because I feel like it's a crime against the actors. Like sometimes you see that they're like really trying to do their best and you're just like, oh, this needs a bit more cooking, this script or whatever. And when I saw the sort of sizzle reel for it, the premise is that she's Asian, obviously, but she's been raised by an Anglo-Saxon family, and her problem is that she's only got the hots for hairy white guys, and she feels sort of sexually frozen around Asian men. And, you know, like it feels like the premise and the way that the kind of promos were done was like real playing for gags. Like there's this sort of scene where she's like and looks across the bar and there's this sort of like gingery guy with a bit of a beer belly and his shirt undone kind of going, and she's like, oh. And I just thought, oh, it just felt a tiny bit kind of like, I don't know.
How much of the actual show is about that?
A bit.
Right.
But what it's more about, and I don't know. I just think she's such a good writer and a great performer. And also, like, so what happens is she kind of like finds this community online of Korean adoptees, and they kind of get together and have dinner and talk about, like, you know, and it actually becomes like an interesting discussion about, look, you know, what happens when you're 4 years old and you're kind of transplanted, and, you know, and what does that kind of build in you about who you are, and her parents are just like, they celebrate her adoption day by like dressing in like Korean national dress and like kimchi everywhere, and like it's sort of like adorably sort of clumsily, you know, scorchingly kind of fond but terrible, and so those are my favourite bits of it. Also, my other favourite bit is like she runs into a guy who was the only other Asian kid at her school, I think, and who was Chinese by descent, and who she'd had a falling out with, and you don't really know why, but it turns out that when she was in her early years of high school and she was trying to be like super popular or whatever, she'd been best friends with this guy through primary school, whose mum ran a Chinese restaurant in town where she used to sort of hang out and have lots of spring rolls and stuff. And he's now changed his name back to his Chinese name, which is Yu Chang. And she's sort of a bit jealous of him because he's got Asian parents, and, you know, like she's like, oh, what's, you know. And Yu Chang is played by Chris Pang, who's like one of the most handsome actors on the planet. So, I mean, I was born through the series partially because of the intense handsomeness of the lead role, but they've got a lot of beef with each other because when she was in her teenage years, she like joined a little gang throwing eggs at the restaurant, and like, you know.
Oh, I see.
And so, yeah.
Right.
So in short, I really enjoyed it. I thought it made me think it's not that long since, you know, Asian faces or non-Anglo faces were kind of a rarity on Australian television, and thank Christ those days are, you know, retreating. But I also think, like, when people are that talented, it doesn't always have to be about race. Like, I don't like...
Oh, totally. I'm watching this great show at the moment called Kim's Convenience with the kids, which they're really enjoying.
Which is brilliant.
It's a sitcom set in Toronto. It's a Korean family who run like a corner store kind of thing.
Kim's Convenience is like one of the greatest TV series.
It's fantastic. Like, and of course, like, their Korean heritage is part of it, and there's lots of laughs mined from the kids with the parents.
Which are people ripping the piss out of their parents. I mean, like, that
exactly.
is actually
it's such a universal
experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of that universal thing. The other thing that's really interesting, and I think is such a rich source of fascinating stories, is like kids of migrants' experience.
Yep, sure.
So, again, funnily enough, this ties with Australian Story, because we've got
back to you.
Part 2 of the restaurant series is with a guy that we're friends with called Sean Christie David, who's a Sri Lankan man who runs a restaurant in Sydney called Colombo Social, and he does various other things, and he does a lot of
It's a social enterprise.
Social enterprise, food-based stuff. Anyway, he talks in the show about...
also very handsome.
He talks in the show about how his parents moved from Sri Lanka when... I can't remember if he'd been born yet or not, but he's got two brothers, so he's the youngest, so I can't remember if he was really small or hadn't been born yet, but either way he has no memory of Sri Lanka. And then he talks about, and this is a bit like what you were just talking about with the woman in White Fever, his first engagement with Sri Lanka is as an adult who's been raised in Australia, and like what a kind of, and he talks about this in the show, like what a kind of discombobulating experience this is. There was another episode we did of Australian Story a while back, and it was this really amazing, actually another Olivia Rousseau story, this amazing Afghan woman who was kind of running remotely from Australia an orphanage that she was funding, and kind of it was working over there, and she would do work to get kids resettled in Australia and so on. Anyway, there was a crisis when the Taliban took over and they were trying to get a heap of kids out in one go. Her son, and so the story followed her and her son as they attempted to do this. Her son, who had grown up in Australia and gone and studied law, there's this, he and his mother had this great relationship. There's this brilliant scene where the mum says, well, we've got to get the paperwork or the visas or whatever, and she just looks at him and she's like, well, you know, you went to university, you've got a law degree, I just don't understand why you can't get this sorted out. And the son just kind of like, he just looks off and rolls his eyes, and it's just like, literally every migrant kid in the country just knows what I just copped there. He just makes this great kind of joke about it. It was just so absolutely wonderful. Anyway, yeah, sorry, I detract. White Fever also, the sizzle reel, we saw the same sizzle reel on it. It left me a little bit cold, but then I saw a clip of it. I haven't watched it, but I saw a clip the other day, which is where she's having a conversation with Ros Hammond and her dad about being more connected to her Korean heritage. Yeah. And it actually made me think, oh, this looks great.
Well, it is great. I mean, it's great. And I think the only problem with the promo is that it just dialed up the kind of, you know, oh, how weird. She's only turned on by kind of, you know, hairy dudes. Like it sort of fetishized the sex angle to a point that I think is not necessarily supported by the series. Is just much more interesting than that.
Right.
It felt like a one gag show,
right?
But it isn't.
So definitely worth giving it a look.
Oh yeah, it's also just like, it's just a delight to watch something that's well written. Like and I got to the end of that and I'll be like, well, I will watch whatever Ra Chapman writes and does next.
People who write and then star in their own stuff like that absolutely support that. So, yeah, that's good. Speaking of people writing their own stuff, so I've given a listen to both the new Taylor Swift album.
Okay.
And
both of them? Are there two?
I went, no, I basically did the first of the double album, and then Cowboy Carter, which is Beyonce's new album.
Right, I've tried to listen to the Beyonce one.
Okay, so firstly, I just want to say it's like comparing apples and pears, and this idea that you have to like one or the other is kind of dumb and reductive in my view. So, but having said
that, you're going to this with a graph. You're like you're pre-plotting your rational response.
But I must say I did prefer the Beyonce album.
Okay.
Because the Taylor album to me felt a bit like variations of the same thing over and over. And it did make me wonder, is Taylor Swift so big now that nobody wants to kind of edit her? And so, whereas the Beyonce album, like the Taylor album to me, I can only put it in writing terms, like you and I talk about this all the time. I felt like it's like a 3,000 word piece of work where there's a great 1,200 word piece in it.
This is what Sales always says when she reads my work. She's like, there's 800 really good words.
And Crab's always like, no, it's 3,000 worth of great words. It's an interesting...
You're always right, but yeah. I get overexcited.
Look, I think it's a really interesting thing because obviously, I mean, my personal bias tends to be less is more, but sometimes obviously, you know, you write stuff and more is more. So it's not always like...
The trick is to not drink your own bathwater. Yeah.
As I think I said to you the other day. I think I literally used those words to our listeners.
So nutritious. My problem is I get attached to gags and I don't want to cut out the gags because I'm basically
See, also it's interesting because if you're a fan of something, like say, I'm just trying to think of someone who writes kind of long And it's enjoyable. I mean, just because my bias is not towards that, or films and stuff. Like, people want to see the director's cut of something, and I'm like, well, I want the 1 hour, 30-minute version, right? If you like something, you kind of want more of it. So to pull this back to Taylor Swift, what I was going to say was, I listen to it and go, oh, I feel like there's, 10 good songs there. It just needed an edit and a bit more production. But I bet you someone who's a fan of Taylor Swift would go, well, how dare you? I just want every bit of Taylor Swift that I can get. Why on earth would you edit her brilliance? So I fully, accept that. But the Beyonce album...
Taylor and I are going to be writing to you jointly.
The Beyonce album cover.
She's mentioned this about you.
Firstly, there's a massively hooky song called Texas Hold'em, which just...
I love that already.
It's like that ba-da-da-da-da in Hamilton. You hear it once and then you just sing it on, down, down. So I thought that it was really genuinely innovative and original and creative, with this kind of blending of the like R&B with the country, even though black country is already a thing.
And it's got the full Americana kind
absolutely,
of treatment.
And it's just, it feels like a kind of, it's not a narrative. The album's not a narrative, but it feels like a really fully realised whole. And
concept album.
Yeah, I just thought it was a really good, strong piece of work.
So I listened to it, and I like the first track, I thought, I was a bit like, what's going on here? Like, look in the mirror and take something off. Like, right. It felt a bit sort of a bit blowsy or something.
Right.
But then I heard the Texas Hold'em one and went, oh, okay, I'll listen to that again. I'm like, damn it.
Yeah, you know why you'd be releasing that as a single kind of straight out, don't you?
Shit, so. Yeah. Hard, yeah. I've not been reading very many books lately, but I did mean to mention one that I read a while back by our colleague Louise Milligan. It's it's called Pheasant's Nest. It's like a crime story. Apparently Louise has managed to gouge out some time in her life to write a freaking novel as well. Anyway, look, it's the story of a young woman who's abducted and family doesn't know where she is. Her boyfriend falls under suspicion. Like, there are a lot of parallels to that very well-known story that Louise covered in Victoria of our ABC colleague Jill Maher, who went missing and was subsequently found to have been murdered. Absolutely extraordinary, shocking, dreadful series of events. Obviously, Louise is drawn pretty closely on her police reporting experience and so on. The thing that I really admired about the book is that I think sometimes there is a tendency particularly when these crimes are committed against women, as is happening to just an unforgivable degree in this country, which is a very right now source of anxiety and horror. There's a tendency for the victims to be sort of flattened out because they're not there to tell their own story. They become a kind of like flattened collection of things that can be learned about them from neighbours or from their Instagram or whatever. And I think the thing that I found moving about this novel was that it actually just rounded out, the character of this woman to whom this is happening as it's happening. And it somehow canvasses all of the extent to which a person's personality and their humour and their intelligence and their flaws can accompany them through even something unthinkable happening. And
Look, I admire anyone who works in journalism who has a stab at writing a novel, because I've been wanting to do it forever and have not got around to it. And I just think the boldness to actually commit to that, because I think the nature of what we do is quite stifling in many ways, right?
Well, it's reassuring. You're in the railroad of like facts. So you're like, well, this happened. How can I make this interesting? How can I rearrange these facts and into a compelling narrative that makes somebody read the first paragraph and then keep reading? If you're me, you'll throw in some gags to try and keep people going where appropriate. Politics, where it's almost always appropriate to take the piss. But yeah, to actually go, okay, now I'm going to make up a story.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Is that what you find? Is that what you find difficult about writing fiction?
I think I've my imagination's been stifled by not allowing it to have free rein because I'm not allowed to. So I think when I sit down,
you live through spreadsheets, love.
When I sit down and attempt to make something up, I just feel like, what?
This isn't allowed.
This isn't allowed. Haven't been reading many books either, but I am reading this thing that is so just wonderful. I just wish it would never end. It's a book of Margaret Atwood short stories called Old Babes in the Wood. And it's just every single thing in it is just, you're just reading someone at the absolute peak of their ability. It's made me wonder, in fact, I think I put on social media, how has this person not won the Nobel Prize for literature? Like, this is, I just can't even fathom it. She has got, listen to me, I'm just about to bang on about how great Margaret Atwood is, coming off the back of how great Beyonce is.
Yeah.
She's got the most economic writing style, but also just the most beautiful wit. My favourite story in the collection so far, and I'm not at the end of it yet, is this one called My Evil Mother that, in fact, I sent you a link to say you just got to buy this because you can buy the story individually. The premise of it is a young woman, starts when she's a teenager, and her mother is this sort of intense irritation to her, and it's because the mother claims to be a witch, and she says she comes home from school and the mother's cooking up stuff in the pot on the stove and it's to cast spells or whatever. Anyway, as the story unfolds, you start to, it's kind of a beautiful commentary actually on just daughter-mother relationships. By the end of the story, you're wondering, was the mother actually doing this stuff, and how much of it was kind of embellished in the daughter's head and so forth. But it's the most wonderful comic take on, I guess, that teenage view of mothers, which is, oh, you're just so embarrassing and you're so this and that.
Which is universal.
It's universal, and it's brilliantly done. Like, I was just, certain bits of it I was just laughing aloud. And this is someone actually, speaking of imagination, there's another story where it's told from the point of view, I know this is going to sound bizarre, but you just got to trust me that it works. It's told from the point of view of a snail who has taken over a woman's body, and the snail is not loving the experience of being in a human body because it's not getting to do its snaily kind of stuff.
Like,
now,
wow, okay.
This is like obviously the...
this sounds like Downtime's Julian Barnes.
It's almost like a flex, right? It's almost like when Ian McEwan does the, like, well, I'm going to write from the embryo.
Wasn't it?
It
was the...
So it's almost like a flex, but nonetheless, it's like, God, Margaret so put her, like, there's a bit where the girl's having sex with her boyfriend, and Margaret's kind of writing about how it's kind of unsatisfactory because it's just not like the snaily kind of...
Well, the snail is a hermaphrodite. It can actually literally go fuck itself.
And Margaret's like, I feel like the snail is basically saying, I'd like to raise at this point that I'm a hermaphrodite, but I feel like it'd freak him out, and so I just... So anyway, it's so comic and just amazing. But again, like, it's just
so this is in the witch story. This is a different story.
Different story,
right, okay,
totally
so
different
snail
story.
Sex happens.
No, but
like,
you want to the story.
You press on through
the story you want to read, if you can get your hands on it, is My Evil Mother. It was just. I can't even tell you how much. Well, what a delight it was.
I already followed the link and I've got it. So
great!
Read it.
You are going to love it.
If we're
so
talking
much.
short stories, can we take 2 seconds to just salute the passing of Alice Munro? Possibly the greatest short story writer of our age.
Well, The Bear Came Over the Mountain is another of my all-time favourite short stories.
Magical writer. I bought that short story, and then I'm also going to go back and tearfully reread some Alice Munro.
A very quick thing before we wrap up. One last thing. I watched Apples Never Fall, which is the...
Oh, yeah, the Leanne Moriarty adaptation.
Yeah.
Sam Neill's in it.
Yeah, it was okay. Yeah.
Oh.
There was a lot of cutaways of, there's 4 kids, the 4 kids in this tennis
Everybody plays
family.
tennis, yeah.
I can't see a cutaway of 4 young people when it's 2 boys and 2 girls without thinking it's Scooby-Doo. I'm sorry. You can't do cutaways of 4, 2 boys, 2 girls. It says Scooby-Doo. There were a few too many shots like that.
That is not what I was expecting you to say, but sure. Does somebody like rip their mask off at the end and say, like, I would have got away with it if it hadn't been for you, damn meddling kids?
No, there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. Sam Neill was great. Annette Bening was great. The 4 kids were all great. I watched the whole thing. I don't know, it just didn't...
They'll be blurbing that review for sure.
Didn't overly grab me.
You are such a weirdo. Are you a snail?
Could be.
All right, slither off then. I'm busy.
Thank you very much for listening or watching. You can find more of our content on YouTube, or if you don't like to look at our faces, and let's face it, that would be fair enough, you can listen to us on Spotify or wherever else you choose.